Welcome to the OneRing.net. I'm going to turn my device on silent so that we can all gather around. I welcome my audience. I welcome everybody around the world, all the beautiful people who are out there in the world coming to share another weekly program with the OneRing.net. We are, for the past 20 and a half years, the OneRing.net has been the most active, most dynamic world portal for all of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit fans. J.R.R. Tolkien fans, all of you are in the right place. Welcome to the OneRing.net. Let's get right to our programming today. Let me begin by introducing the man who's behind the scenes. He's hidden behind the little green curtain over there. Pay no attention to him. He's just the Wizard of Oz. But we have a friend of ours. His name is Justin. Hello, Justin. He is our producer, running things. And yep, if you saw that little split screen, that's him acknowledging that he's going to be running the technical side of our show. My name is Clifford Broadway, and I'm a writer and a contributor, Tolkien expert for the OneRing.net for a long time, over 20 years. And I wrote and produced the feature documentary, Ringer's Lord of the Fans, which is, well, we're going to have some surprising news for the ultimate re-release of Ringer's Lord of the Fans. You guys stay tuned. In the coming weeks, we're going to have a very special announcement. Let me just clue you in. I'm not supposed to say this, but we're looking at a very big re-release of the film. It's going to be very exciting. Today we're going to talk about that book, that big, chunky, thick, difficult to read, often called problematic by a lot of Tolkien fans who go right after The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and they try to get into this, the Silmarillion. And the reason why we're going to discuss some of this in detail today, we had to say farewell to Ian Holm last week, and we've had to bring you news of Amazon Studios getting ready to go back into full swing. They're going back into full production in New Zealand because, believe it or not, New Zealand has managed to reduce COVID-19 infections to zero, and they're reopening the island of New Zealand to production. And as we know, I know that you guys have been paying attention, a lot of the actors and actresses who are involved directly with Amazon Prime's new Second Age of Middle-earth series, a lot of these actors and actresses have been not so obviously posting pictures of the Silmarillion on their Instagram and on their Twitter and on all their TikTok. And it seems that everybody in the whole world realizes, wait a minute, that's the one book from J.R.R. Tolkien that we see all the actors and actresses pretty much involved in. And that causes the question. Indeed. A big question among the fandom is, why is this? They don't have the licensing. They licensed nothing from this book. At least that's what we know. That is what we've been reporting. And I think the reporting might change. Maybe. Because we understood that they had licensed everything in The Lord of the Rings, including the appendices. And we mean Appendix A, B, C, and D, and all of them in the back of The Return of the King. And a lot of that content overlaps with the story of the Second Age and Númenor. So, right here, the Silmarillion has been quite the interesting subject of conversation. And I'm going to get right to a direct reading from the Silmarillion. We're going to take a look at a little bit of this section called, there it is, the Akallabêth. There you go. That is the story of Númenor and the Second Age. And also, at the very end of this book, there's another section that I'm going to start reading to you right now. And it is called Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. There you go. You see that? That's what we're going to talk about today. And the reason why is because there really is a strong outside possibility that we don't know everything. Caveat emptor, we report on what we know, and we report on what we hear, and we confirm those details as we can confirm them. A year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, we reported about the Amazon series being centered around young Aragorn. And at the time, that was truth. And everybody said that we got it wrong, but it wasn't wrong. It was correct, but it was only correct until it wasn't. When it was no longer true, they had changed the writer's room, and J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay and the people inside the writer's room at Amazon had changed course from young Aragorn to something else. And I'm very, very curious about this because I'm hoping that there's an outside possibility that the writers, the producers have had the ability to renegotiate. I don't know for sure. I do not know for sure, but maybe the reason why we see this book, the Silmarillion, everywhere on Instagram and Twitter and everybody else in between, maybe it's because these actors need to read this, and the section of the book that would be most relevant to them in the Second Age would be the story about the Akallabêth, which is the rise and fall of Númenor, and this stuff right here. So, let us proceed. Welcome to the reading room, my little goslings. Uncle Clifford is going to read you from the pages of J.R.R. Tolkien. Of course, there's a low flying helicopter going right over my house, so as usual, just hear lots of ambient tales. I mean, a lot of ambient noise. Here's an ambient tale, right? Please ignore all the noises outside. Of old, there was Sauron, the Maya, whom the Sindar in Beleriand named Gorthaur. I didn't know that, really. It's been a long time. It's been a long time since I remembered that. Sauron had another name in Beleriand, and the Sindarin elves called him Gorthaur. In the beginning of Arda, Melkor seduced him to his allegiance, and he became the greatest and most trusted of the servants of the enemy, and the most perilous, for he could assume many forms, and for long, if he willed, he could still appear noble and beautiful, so as to deceive all but the most wary. Do you see where this is going, ladies and gentlemen? This stuff, and I only read the first sentence. That was only the first two sentences, and everything about this is precisely what Amazon Studios is developing for the Second Age show. So let us continue. When Thangorodrim was broken and Morgoth overthrown, Sauron put on his fair hue again and did obeisance to Eonwë, the herald of Manwë, and abjured all of his evil deeds. And some hold that this was not falsely done, but that Sauron, in truth, repented, if only out of fear, being dismayed by the fall of Morgoth and the great wrath of the lords of the West. But it was not within the power of Eonwë to pardon those of his own order, and he commanded Sauron to return to Aman, and there receive the judgment of Manwë. Then Sauron was ashamed, and he was unwilling to return in humiliation, and to receive from the Valar a sentence It might be of long servitude, in proof of his good faith. For under Morgoth his power had been great. Therefore, when Eonwë departed, he hid himself in Middle-earth, and he fell back into evil, for the bonds that Morgoth had upon him were very, very strong. In the great battle, and the tumults, and the fall of Thangorodrim, there were mighty convulsions in the earth, and Beleriand was broken and laid waste, and northward and westward many lands sank beneath the waters of the great sea. In the east, in Osiriand, the walls of Ered Luin, which is the Blue Mountains, were broken, and a great gap was made in them towards the south, and a gulf of the sea flowed in. Into that gulf the river Lune fell by a new course, and it was called, therefore, the Gulf of Lune. That country had, of old, been named Lindon by the Noldor, and this name it bore thereafter. And many of the Eldar still dwelt there, lingering, unwilling yet to forsake Beleriand, where they had fought and labored long. Gil-galad, son of Fingon, was their king, and with him was Elrond half-elven, son of Eärendil the Mariner, and brother of Elros, the first king of Númenor. Ah, it's all coming together. Upon the shores of the Gulf of Lune, the elves built their havens, and named them Mithlond. Now, you might recognize the root form of Mithlond for Grey Havens, because they also call Gandalf Mithrandir, which is the Grey Pilgrim, or the Grey Wanderer. So these elvish compound words are easy to follow if you study them hard enough. Mithlond, Grey Havens; Mithrandir, Grey Wanderer, for Gandalf. So, and there they held many ships, for the harbourage was good. From the Grey Havens the Eldar ever and anon set sail, fleeing from the darkness of the days of earth. For by the mercy of the Valar, the firstborn could still follow the straight road and return, if they would, to their kindred in Erisea and Valinor beyond the encircling seas. Others of the Eldar there were who crossed the mountains of Ered Luin in that age and passed into the inner lands. Many of these were Teleri, and now they're talking about Thranduil in this paragraph, talking about Thranduil going back inland to dwell in Mirkwood. Of others of the Eldar there were who crossed the mountains of Ered Luin in that age and passed into the inner lands. Many of these were Teleri, survivors of Doriath and Osiriand, and they established realms among the Sylvan elves in the woods and the mountains, far from the sea. We're talking about Legolas and Thranduil right here, okay? For which, nonetheless, they ever yearned in their hearts. Only in Eregion, which men called Hollin, did elves of Noldorin race establish a lasting realm beyond the Ered Luin. Eregion was nigh to the great mansions of the dwarves that were named Khazad-dûm, but by the elves Hathadrond, and afterwards Moria. From Ost-in-Nethil, the city of the elves, the high road ran to the west gate of Khazad-dûm. For a friendship arose between the dwarves and the elves, such has never elsewhere been, to the enrichment of both of those peoples. In Eregion, the craftsmen of the Gwaith-i-Myrdain, the people of the jewelsmiths, surpassed in all cunning all that ever have wrought, save only for Fëanor himself. And indeed, greatest in skill among them was Celebrimbor, son of Curufin, who was estranged from his father and remained in Nargothrond when Celegorm and Curufin were driven forth, as is told in the Quenta Silmarillion. Now look, I've only read a page and a half, and you have just set up in a page and a half the entirety of the Amazon series. If anybody asks, they don't have the Silmarillion licensed. We still have that basic accuracy to report. They don't have the Silmarillion, but if they did, what I'm reading with you now is everything. Okay? This is a segment continuing in the back pages of the Silmarillion of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. Now, the stuff I'm speaking of is all Second Age stuff right now. Elsewhere in Middle-earth, there was peace for many years, yet the lands were for the most part savage and desolate, save only where the people of Beleriand came. Many elves dwelt there, indeed, as they had dwelt through the countless years, wandering free in the wide lands far from the sea. But they were Avari, to whom the deeds of Beleriand were but a rumor, and Valinor was only a distant name. And in the south and in the further east, men multiplied, and most of them turned to evil, for Sauron was at work. Seeing the desolation of the world, Sauron said in his heart that the Valar, having overthrown Morgoth, had again forgotten Middle-earth, and his pride grew apace. He looked with hatred on the Eldar, and he feared the men of Númenor, who came back at whiles in their ships to the shores of Middle-earth. But for long he dissembled his mind and concealed the dark designs that he shaped in his heart. Men he found the easiest to sway of all the peoples of the earth, but long he sought to persuade the elves to his service, for he knew that the firstborn had the greater power, and he went far and wide among them, and his hue was still that of one both fair and wise. Only to Lindon he did not come, for Gil-galad and Elrond doubted him and his fair seeming, and though they knew not who in truth he was, they would not admit him to that land. But elsewhere the elves received him gladly. Wasn't that stupid of them? I'm sorry, I'm editorially adding. Again, for those folks who are joining us in the chat, we do not have any clear authority to say that they do or do not have the license for the Silmarillion. All indicators are that they do not have. Okay? And I'm just reading this to you because it is everything part and parcel of what they're building their entire series around. So, again, I'm holding on to this weird marginal idea that I have, that they may have licensed this material that I'm sharing with you now. And everything that Tolkien is covering here has to stay the same, but the writers and the producers have to create new story threads and new characters that are going to be interwoven within this existing text. So Gil-galad and Elrond doubted him in his fair seeming, and though they knew not who in truth he was, they would not admit him into that land. But elsewhere the elves received him gladly, and few among them hearkened to the messengers from Lindon, bidding them beware. For Sauron took to himself the name of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and they had, at first, much profit from his friendship. And he said to them, Alas for the weakness of the great! For a mighty king is Gil-galad, and wise in all lore is Master Elrond. And yet they will not aid me in my labors. Can it be that they do not desire to see other lands become as blissful as their own? But wherefore should Middle-earth remain forever desolate and dark, whereas the elves could make it as fair as Erisea? Nay, even as Valinor. And since you have not returned thither, as you might, I perceive that you love this Middle-earth, as do I. Is it not then our task to labor together? To labor together for its enrichment, and for the raising of all the elven kindreds that wander here, untaught, to the height of that power and knowledge which those have who are beyond the sea? Now, ladies and gentlemen, now you know why this stuff is so critically important. Because I believe that they need to. Amazon must license this stuff right here. Page 287 in the hardcover anniversary edition of the Silmarillion, right here, page 287. If they don't license this beautiful dialogue, then they're going to have a bunch of writers fake it and write some stuff that will be closer to Tolkien, but I would prefer that they use these exact words. And this is where they're building a show. Kim in the chat says, I just don't see how they could depict the forging of the rings and also the fall of Númenor. As those events occur, yeah, I can't see the rest of your message, but I can imagine that those events occur such a far, far distance apart in centuries on the time frame. They're going to have to be very clever with how they abbreviate and truncate the storytelling here. But I'm just thunderstruck by the dialogue of Anatar. Here he is trying to tell them, but wherefore should Middle-earth remain forever desolate and dark, whereas the elves could make it as fair as Erisea, nay, even as Valinor? Do you see that serpent, that real Lucifer serpent quality that Tolkien is giving to Sauron right here? You know, it's just so, it's so specific. It's very spiritual. That Tolkien's spiritual belief system is backing this up 1,000%. It was in, allow me to continue, ladies and gentlemen. It was in Erudion that the counsels of Sauron were most gladly received, for in that land the Noldor desired ever to increase the skill and subtlety of their works. There's no mention of Galadriel, but she's in here at this point in chapter of history. Moreover, they were not at peace in their hearts, since they had refused to return into the West. And they desired both to stay in Middle-earth, which indeed they loved, and yet to enjoy the bliss of those that had departed. Therefore, they hearkened to Sauron, and they learned of him many things. And for his knowledge was great. And in those days, the smiths of Ost-in-Ethil surpassed all that they had contrived before. And they took thought, and they made rings of power. But Sauron guided their labors, and he was aware of all that they did. For his desire was to set a bond upon the elves and to bring them under his vigilance. Now, the elves made many rings, but secretly Sauron made one ring to rule all the others, and their power was bound up with it, to be subject wholly to it, and to last only so long as it too should last. And much of the strength and will of Sauron passed into that one ring, for the power of the elven rings was very great, and that which should govern them must be a thing of surpassing potency. And Sauron forged it in the mountain of fire in the land of shadow. And while he wore the one ring, he could perceive all the things that were done by means of the lesser rings, and he could see and govern the very thoughts of those who wore them. Excuse me. Excuse me. got to wet my whistle a little bit. Thank you. But the elves were not so lightly to be caught.
Acne, fine lines, pores.
Hello? Hello? Oh, looks like someone was just coming into the show for a second. I don't know what that was, but let me finish this paragraph. But the elves were not so lightly to be caught. As soon as Sauron set the One Ring upon his finger, they were aware of him, and they knew him, and perceived that he would be master of them, and of all that they wrought. Then in anger and fear they took off their rings. But he, finding that he was betrayed, and that the elves were not deceived, he was filled with wrath, and he came against them with open war, demanding that all the rings should be delivered to him, since the elven smiths could not have attained to their making without his lore and counsel. But the elves fled from him, and 3 of their rings they saved, and bore them away, and hid them. Now these were the 3 that had last been made, and they were possessed with the greatest powers. Narya, Nenya, and Vilya, they were named, the rings of fire, water, and of air, set with a ruby, and adamant, and sapphire. And of all the elven rings, Sauron most desired to possess them. For those who had them in their keeping could ward off the decays of time, and postpone the weariness of the world. But Sauron could not discover them, for they were given into the hands of the wise, who concealed them and never again used them openly, while Sauron kept the ruling ring. Therefore, the 3 remained unsullied, for they were forged by Celebrimbor alone, and the hand of Sauron had never touched them. Yet they also were subject to the One. From that time, war never ceased between Sauron and the elves, and Eregion was laid waste, and Celebrimbor slain, and the doors of Moria were shut. In that time, the stronghold and refuge of Imladris, that men call Rivendell, was founded by Elrond half-elven, and long it endured. There you go. But Sauron gathered into his hands all the remaining rings of power, and he dealt them out to the other peoples of Middle-earth, hoping thus to bring under his sway all those that desired secret power beyond the measure of their kind. 7 rings he gave to the dwarves, but to men he gave 9, for men proved in this matter, as in others, the readiest to his will. Kim is asking, I wonder why Sauron desired the 3 rings, since their primary power was to preserve life. Interesting question. I believe that Sauron probably wanted the rings, mostly the 3 elven rings, because they were the most powerful, and he wanted them just for the sake of taking them away from the powerful elven lords, Gil-galad, Círdan, and Elrond. Now, Gil-galad would later transfer his ring, Nenya, to Galadriel. No, wait, let me get that wrong. I think Gil-galad had the ring Narya. That's my mistake. Gil-galad had the ring Narya. And then Gil-galad gave it to... Oh, this is such a complex history. Galadriel had hers. Elrond had his. No, actually, Elrond received Vilya from Gil-galad. Got it. So Gil-galad had Vilya first, and Círdan had Narya, the Ring of Fire, first. Gil-galad bequeathed his ring to Elrond, and then later Círdan bequeathed his elven ring to Gandalf. Now I got that right. Okay, so all this stuff is now moving right into the Third Age, about Sauron's power to ensnare the men. But here's a little bit about the dwarves that is most interesting. Okay? 7 rings he gave to the dwarves, but to the men he gave 9, for men proved in this matter, as in others, the readiest to his will. Oh, Gil-galad gave it to Elrond? Okay, I got it wrong. Gil-galad gave it to Elrond. Oh, I did get that. I eventually got it right. Yeah, Gil-galad gave it to Elrond. Got it. It took me 10 minutes, but I eventually got it right. Here it says, and all those rings that he governed, he perverted, the more easily since he had a part in their making. And they were accursed, and they betrayed in the end all those that used them. The dwarves, indeed, proved tough and hard to tame. They ill endure the domination of others, and the thoughts of their hearts are hard to fathom, nor can they be turned to shadows. They used their rings only to gain wealth, only for the getting of wealth, but wrath and an overmastering greed of gold were kindled in their hearts, of which evil enough after came to the prophet of Sauron. It is said that the foundation of each of the 7 hordes of the dwarf kings of old was a golden ring. But all those hordes long ago were plundered, and the dragons devoured them. And of the 7 rings, some were consumed in fire, and some Sauron recovered. Thank you, Chris. It's great to have you here, Chris Saint. Now, this is material which is critically important to the writers and the producers of Amazon. And all that stuff that I just shared with you, and that was, what was that? A page and a half? 2. 1, 2, yeah, that was only 2 pages and a couple of sentences more. It's really, really fantastic. Actually, I read 4 pages for you. I'm excited to open up this conversation. Hello, Ellen. Hello, Ellen. I see you. There you are. It looks like others are joining the conversation. Let's talk about this. Justin, Kathy.
Hi.
There's Kathy and Ellen. Huh. Hello, I see you. Hi, how are you?
Good.
Let me tell
I
Ellen.
enjoyed your reading. Thank you for the reading.
Okay. You're welcome.
Hello.
You're very welcome. The content is a little bit too important for Amazon to overlook. Don't you guys think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, if they want to cover Second Age stuff, and it's either going to be the Fall of Númenor or the Forging of the Rings or some combo of the two, they have to get a hold of that material.
Mm-hmm.
And
they can,
if I remember
they can
correctly,
they can stretch it across. I'm just saying they could stretch all of the thousands of years across a couple of seasons at least.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And tighten it up a little bit. What was interesting, and you might want to go back to that page, was when the elves discovered his deception and fled and hid from him, they were able to salvage 3 rings. Does that mean the elves, that there were originally more rings for the elves?
Yeah, yes. Professor Tolkien literally says that they made many rings.
Wow.
And even Sauron, we discover in the book, is busy with ringcraft and experimenting with making lesser rings of his own, as Tolkien tells us. So, when Gandalf says that line of dialogue in the Hobbit movie, there are many rings in this world, and none of them should be taken lightly. There's many. Yeah, let me read it one more time. It says here, but Sauron guided their labors, and he was aware of all they did, for his desire was to set a bond upon the elves and to bring them under his vigilance. Now, the elves made many rings. Sauron made one ring to rule all the others. that he put so much of his will, potency of this Horcrux, you know, because Sauron thought that this one had to be strong enough to surpass the potency of the 3 elven rings, right? And then it says here, in anger and fear, they took off their rings, and it says, but the elves fled from him, and 3 of their rings they saved, which means that there were others that we just don't know about.
And they must have gotten lost, otherwise you'd think magic rings would surface somewhere. If they were somewhere to be found, that is.
Right. That's been a subject of fan fiction for many years, with people, very grandiose speculations about where some of these lesser rings, and connecting it back to the text in the Lord of the Rings book, where Saruman has been tampering with ring making. It leads me to believe, it really does lead me to believe that's one of the reasons why Saruman was so interested in taking up the old Númenorian tower at Orthanc, so that he could be really close, only like 75, 100 miles away, really close by to Eregion, and be able to search the area, and that's where the wild men lived, and Saruman eventually had the wild men of Holland roused up in war against Rohan. But I got a feeling that Saruman wanting to stay in that nearby location may have been because he wanted to go wandering around scavenging for, with his metal detector, scavenging things in the sand, right?
Yeah. The other question I have about that then is, when Bilbo finally admits to Gandalf that he's got this magic ring, and Gandalf is telling him, don't fool with it, and everything like that. 60 years before, obviously, we get to Gandalf finally researching it. Did he think it was one of the lost additional rings that the elves lost, or a found Dwarven ring? I mean, did Gandalf at the time have his ring already? I mean, it puzzles me that for 60 plus years he just let that magic ring sit in the Shire and didn't do his research then. But he waited until after.
Gandalf's delay. Gandalf's lengthy delay has been a subject of speculation forever and ever and ever. I mean, you watch the Fellowship of the Ring movie, and you have no idea he was gone for 17 years after the birthday party until the time he came back. You have no idea. I wonder, Kim is asking in the...
I was just going to say, even those 6 years, the 60 years between going to the Lonely Mountain and Bilbo sitting in the Shire for 60 years, I mean, that's a gap too that's unaccounted for of what Gandalf feels about that ring. I'm encouraged by the fact that Tolkien is covering his ass here in the Silmarillion and saying that they made many rings. And if that's a real important piece to help explain that there were so many, even other minor magical rings that are not written about during the War of the Ring, during that time period that we're so intimate with. It supports the psychology that Gandalf would not immediately assume that the ring that Bilbo had was a super elite power ring. Maybe he didn't know was even dangerous. Maybe Gandalf was just like, well, he found a magic ring and I better keep an eye on it, but I don't need to follow up right now. He must not have gotten a vibe off.
Go ahead. Yeah, that's weird though. it's weird. I was going to ask Ellen. Do you have sound, Ellen? Do you have sound now?
I
Nope.
don't
Okay.
hear.
Um,
I think she's still.
okay. I'm going to
She
tell
might think
Justin.
she's still. Yeah, she might still be muted by Justin.
Okay. All right. I'm going to tell her now.
Hi, Ellen.
Okay. Hi, Ellen.
No.
Oh, no. The sound isn't quite right. No. Oh, Ellen. All right. That's okay. Ha, Tammy says, too much leaf. It adds his brain. The real conversation that I want to get into is the fact that we've seen nothing on Instagram from these actors except this book. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
Over
kind of
and
icky.
over and over and over and over. And that means there's a pattern here. There's an established something going on here. You know what I mean? Kathy, what do you think?
I completely agree that if they're showing it and they're reading it, either their characters are based on characters in it and it's going to be new material, or the subject matter's right there and they're trying to get the feel for that period and that feel, that language, and those relationships. Okay, Ellen's back. Can she hear us?
Okay, you're back. Okay.
I don't think she can. Huh.
All right. I think Justin is trying to fix the problem, but we need to talk to some of our friends. And yeah, John says, I think that's a great point because the notion is emphasized by Saruman's dialogue to Gandalf about him. Yeah, I wish I could see more of the chat here.
Might not have
Might
asserted
not
its
the ring
power.
have asserted its power to cloud Gandalf's astuteness? Yes, Chad. Yep. That's a very good idea, Chad. It could have been clouding itself and trying to be, unobtrusive. Yep. I can
Plus
see
the
that.
fact that Bilbo, he puts it on and he turns invisible. He doesn't know it's any more powerful than that. So he also doesn't access any other power from the ring except for to turn invisible. So if he's not asserting anything over it, and if it's not asserting power over him, then it's just a ring that makes him invisible when he needs to be.
That's right. So here's this part from the Akallabêth, and I'm going to take a quick look at this.
You want me to keep talking?
No. This is just the bit right here. This is the part that I'm going to read from the Akallabêth. This is the downfall of Numenor, and let me get this this
that's
out
my
to
favorite
you here.
part, right? It's my favorite
Me
part.
too. Of the book? Yes, it is. It's actually one of mine too. And sitting upon his cavern throne in the city of Armenelos, in the glory of his power, he brooded darkly, thinking of war. And we're talking about Ar-Pharazôn. This is Ar-Pharazôn, the Golden. He's the king of Númenor. So this is who we're talking about here. For he had learned in Middle-earth of the strength of the realm of Sauron and of his hatred of Westernesse. And now there came to him the masters of ships and captains returning out of the east, and they reported that Sauron was putting forth his might, since Ar-Pharazôn had gone back from Middle-earth, and he was pressing down upon the cities by the coasts. And he had taken now the title of the King of Men, and declared his purpose to drive the Númenorians into the sea, and destroy even Númenor, if that might be. Great was the anger of Ar-Pharazôn at these tidings, and as he pondered long in secret, his heart was filled with the desire of power unbounded and the sole dominion of his will, and he determined, without the counsel of the Valar, or the aid of any of the wisdom of his own, but his own, that the title of the King of Men he would himself claim, and he would compel Sauron to become his vassal and his servant, for in his pride he deemed that no king should ever arise so mighty as to vie with the heir of Erindil. Therefore he began in time to smithy great hoard of weapons, and many ships of war he built and stored them with his arms, and when all was made ready, he himself set sail with his host into the east. This is where Ar-Pharazôn arrives. Yeah, Kim Rudolph says he needs to be a dark, brooding character. I'm thinking Richard Madden. Yes. And men saw his sails coming up out of the sunset, dyed as with scarlet and gleaming with red and gold, and fear fell upon the dwellers by the coasts, and they fled far away. But the fleet came at last, so that place that was called Umbar, where was the mighty haven of the Númenorians, that no hand had wrought. Empty and silent were all the lands about, when the King of the Sea marched upon Middle-earth. For 7 days he journeyed with banner and trumpet, and he came to a hill, and he went up, and he set there his pavilion and his throne, and he sat him down in the midst of the land, and the tents of his host were ranged all about him, blue, golden, and white, as a field of tall flowers. Then he sent forth heralds, and he commanded Sauron to come before him and swear to him fealty. And Sauron came. Even from his mighty tower of Barad-dûr he came, and he made no offer of battle, for he perceived that the power and majesty of the kings of the sea surpassed all rumor of them, so that he could not trust even the greatest of his servants to withstand them, and he saw not his time yet to work his will with the Dunedain, when force might not avail. Therefore he humbled himself before Ar-Pharazôn and smoothed his tongue, and men wondered, for all that he said seemed fair and wise. At that point, Ar-Pharazôn takes the Dark Lord Sauron back to Númenor as a captive prisoner. All of this stuff is right here in the last final 2 sections of the Silmarillion. I cannot imagine them making the show now without this content. At that point, Ar-Pharazôn takes the Dark Lord Sauron back to Númenor as a captive prisoner. All of this stuff is right here.
It's a loop.
Last final 2 sections of the Silmarillion. I cannot imagine them making the show now without this content.
Facebook and the whatever this live studio is run at 2 different time speeds. So I had to close Facebook.
Right here is a loop. I guess so. I can hear my echo of the past. Sounds bad.
Yeah, I had to close Facebook because it was echoing.
Andrew suggesting. Oh, that's good. So I'm sorry that there's some technical issues, but I want to reach out right now to the people who are in the YouTube chat, since we're coming down to the last 8 or 9 minutes of our show. Here's a question from Irialis. Did Gandalf know what the ring looked like before the events of Lord of the Rings? Meaning, did he know what the One Ring looked like? No, I don't believe Gandalf knew that until he went and did the research that he needed to do.
Yeah. I have a quick question for you.
Yes.
Doing a reread of, just about ready to finish Fellowship of the Ring, but I kind of slowed down. I've been doing a chat with a bunch of friends, and we're taking it chapter by chapter and really delving into the pieces. And when you get to the poem about Arundel that Bilbo does at the Hall of Fire,
Oh, it's wonderful.
I heard it. Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I had never really read it and like paid attention to it.
Yeah.
If nothing else, I want to build his costume. It just sounds amazing. And then when they talked about
Hmm.
his flying ships and stuff like that, I would love. I mean, because he founds Numenor, correct?
Eddingdale?
Arundel, does he found it or does he come from there? I mean, what is his link
No.
with Numenor?
Numenor was founded by Elros, which is Elrond's twin brother.
Got it. Okay.
His twin
Yeah.
brother who decided to become a mortal man.
Yes. I just still
Yep.
would love to see a flying ship that can't touch down in Middle Earth, but I would love to see that.
You know,
After reading that poem, I was like, I want that somewhere. Even if it's just artwork of it on the wall or something in somebody's chamber, I want to see it.
I'm the person who
Well,
thinks
guys,
that. Hey, there's Justin. Hi, Justin. Welcome.
you know what? You know what time it is? We've got about 5 minutes left in the show, and people are wondering what's this week's Green Dragon gossip.
Ah, okay. The Green Dragon gossip for me is to remind everybody that your favorite Marvel villain, which is Tom Hiddleston as Loki, your favorite Loki, who's going to get his new TV show, it's going to be whenever that comes out, you should take a very close look at everything that Marvel does with the character Loki, because you are definitely in the same wheelhouse as what Anatar is going to be like. And that includes character, dialogue stylings, the style of dialogue, the type of lies and web of lies that are being woven. You should anticipate that there's going to be a lot of textbook, check marks between what Loki has done and what Sauron is going to do slash Anatar.
I've got some
Yep.
more Green Dragon gossip. Cliff, I think you've heard this a couple times before, but the gossip is getting stronger. Kathy, I don't know if you've heard this yet.
Nope. Clue me in.
The latest Green Dragon gossip is the Amazon has cast a super duper A-lister, and they're keeping him very, very, very secret.
Really?
For a big announcement. Now, you just said that Sauron serves our Phazon, right?
Sauron was brought as a prisoner to Ar-Pharazôn, who was the last. He was the very last king of Númenor before its destruction. So if they're going to ask a big name person, then that means if that character is revealed to be the Golden King, Ar-Pharazôn, then that means we know the TV show is going to be in a quadrant of the late end of the Second Age, not earlier.
The gossip is the A-lister. I want to see your reactions if you agree with this casting. How do you say his name? Ar-Pharazôn?
Pharazôn.
Ar-Pharazôn will be played by
Pharazôn.
Russell Crowe.
Yeah,
Really?
I can see that.
I can see that. That would be cool.
The last king of
He's got
Númenor.
a nice
Yes, that would be
deep
pretty
voice.
cool.
He can do majestic. Yep, he could do it.
Yep. So that's the Green Dragon.
He's been. That's
He's
an interesting piece of gossip. If that, but having news about Cameron, excuse me, I meant to say Russell. having any news about Russell Crowe, all right, that's nowhere as important as pegging the actuality of the character. Because if that actual character is really there, then that puts us in a very specific time window
I think
over a large swath
I
of
think
thousands of years.
They're condensing. The magic of television is they're condensing a lot of time into this. So the other Green Dragon gossip is they are bringing the writers to New Zealand, and they're working out all of the things before a potential lockdown of Americans from New Zealand.
Yes, of course.
There's a mad rush right now to talk to writers, producers, and potential actors to get them into New Zealand while the doors are still open. You still have to go through quarantine in New Zealand, but
you also still have to get a visa, and so they're doing visa waivers, and they're doing them in waves. There's now about 5 shows or 5 films projects that are have permission to film there now, that they just expanded. But as far as tourism or business travel goes, they haven't even opened up the Tasman corridor between Australia and New Zealand yet.
Right. So they're trying to get everything locked in because the expectation is that New Zealand will close their borders completely to Americans. And so they're still putting actors in quarantine there. So that's the gossip. And what we've heard is the other gossip is Amazon has its full confidence in what they're seeing out of J.A. Bayona. And we're talking levels of creativity that we expected out of Guillermo del Toro. And he is definitely bringing an international influence and a Spanish flair that we've sorely missed since Ralph Bakshi filmed Lord of the Rings in Spain. And Amazon is potentially negotiating with Bayona to take over the whole series, not just the pilot.
Wow, that's pretty interesting gossip.
Yeah, because that's hard for a project like this. That's why you typically have a stable of directors.
The problem is,
they're taking.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, Kathy. The problem is that COVID and quarantine and closed borders means that the directors that they were pursuing to take over this episode or that episode or that episode may not be available, may not be healthy, and may be locked out of the country because they're American. So there are heavy negotiations right now. A lot of money is at play. Writers have to decide if they want to go to New Zealand for at least 8 months at this point, because that's expected to take 8 months.
Oh, what a hardship. Oh my God, what a hardship.
So that's the Green Dragon gossip. I'm Justin, and I'm out of here.
Thank you, Justin. That's great. Bye. You know what? I'm all about that. Okay, it seems to make a lot of sense that the New Zealand government and the health officials would do what has happened with some European countries, because the American culture cannot do what is a proper risk assessment for everybody, and cannot behave themselves with also the conditional benefit for everybody, and because everybody in America cannot seem to accept and do that, and a lot of European countries are going to say, no, you cannot come here.
Yeah.
It is
the EU is
perfectly. Yep, it is perfectly within.
Greece is about to also close, because Greece is not part of the EU, but Greece is about to also do a lockdown. And Australia, I mean, let's put it this way, Qantas will not be flying until the middle of next year. So Qantas itself, outside internationally, they're only going to be doing domestic and cross Tasman. Even the major airlines won't be flying these routes. So,
exactly. Every one of these facts kind of backs up Justin's rumor mill. So if they're going to take all the work of the writers and the Spanish director J.A. Bayona. And if they're not going to lose like a brain drain and lose all the people that they've got there. And if other folks cannot travel to the country now, then maybe it makes much better sense for the production to keep Mr. Bayona and the existing team and keep them there as long as they can. I'm very excited about all this news.
Yeah, and writers, of course, you can have some writers, some writers might be able to do this. Others who have families or extended, I can see where there's situations where a writer might not be able to go down there. But a writer doesn't have to be on set to write, because you can still call, you can still Zoom if you need to update. So they can split the team, at least writers. But when it comes to your physical production, when it comes to your costumes, to your effects, you need a lot of those people. Okay, although we do know that with the effects people, they can also transmit. So they can also work partially in country and partially elsewhere.
Yep.
Britain.
They sure could. They sure could. I'm excited about that. The probability of getting a big, splashy name, like A-list Oscar winner, casting announcement, that's one nice bit of news. But to have it confirmed to a character that lets us narrow down the scope of the narrative is so helpful. It's so good to know.
Yeah.
So that's the news, ladies and gentlemen. We are now at the end of our hour at 1 hour's worth. We've got to say thank you to everybody joining us here at theonering.net. Again, if you want to go back, rewind, we're doing a quick review of the juicy good materials in the Silmarillion. And the reason why I wanted to read all that stuff to you guys is because every actress and actor in Amazon's Second Age Middle-earth series, I'm going to have to stop calling it Lord of the Rings series, because that's not what it is. The thing is, all of this stuff has been showing up on social media for a reason, and I encourage all of my audience who has never experienced it to read the Silmarillion, get right down into the depths of it. You'll enjoy it. It's going to change your life. It's fantastic. And
get past the first two chapters.
If you can get past the first two chapters, take it slow. Go easy with yourself at first. But it's very, very interesting that Amazon tells us nothing, and we're left with all these little visual clues and bits of gossip everywhere, and that's what we've got. So that's all the news that is fit to print. I would not be surprised if within the next 6 or 8 months, Amazon makes an announcement and says that they've licensed stuff from the Silmarillion. It'll make the entire fandom go apeshit crazy. Everyone's going to go, it'll be great.
All they have to do is give us a couple character names and we'll know.
And then we'll know. Yes,
if
we'll know.
Ar-Pharazôn, or if they put Anatar, if they actually put those names on somebody, then we'll know.
Then again, somebody in the chat, that's Spartan343, who says, what do we call it then? Middle-earth, the Second Age? Let me close the show with one final thought. Maybe it's not such a bad idea, after all, for the series to be coming from the Second Age and still be called The Lord of the Rings, because if the story that Amazon gives us is all about Sauron, if it's all about Sauron, as he tricks everybody and everybody gets fooled by him, and he makes the rings, and Celebrimbor makes the three, and then Sauron reveals himself. Maybe, with it all leading up to being taken prisoner to Númenor, and Sauron contributing to the ultimate downfall of Númenor, maybe it's appropriate that the entire freaking series be a reference to the Lord of the Rings. Because as Gandalf tells you, there can be only one, and he does not share power. With that wonderful thought, I'm going to leave you folks for another week. I wish you all safety, many blessings to you. Have a safe week, and come back to us on theonering.net every Tuesday, we're going to have another live stream, and we'll talk with more interviews and more clever people, and we'll find out what's going on behind the scenes in New Zealand. Until then, you can follow us on all of our social media platforms, The One Ring Net, and publishing articles on the main website at theonering.net. Myself, Clifford Broadway. You can find me at QuickBeam2000 on Instagram and Twitter, sending all my love to all the people out there. Thank you for joining us. To all of those out there, I say stay safe and, what's the phrase? Good night and good luck. Buenos noches y buena suerte.